powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, this is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher here in just a second. But first, I want to congratulate Mike in EHT, Matthew in Point Pleasant. They are our latest qualifiers. They're going to be hanging out at Yuri's on Friday the 14th as we will be live. And one of these qualifiers is heading to Pittsburgh to see the Phillies play the Pirates with me, thanks to Philly Sports Trips. You and a friend get to travel. Now, you're not staying in my room with me, Moshe. I can't invite them into my room, but I'm going to the games with them. We're partying up. We're going to be doing the whole party, the tailgate party, and we know that Philly Sports Trips puts on a great party. So we're going to PNC Park, and those two gentlemen there are our latest qualifiers. What's going on? Geoff Mosher is in the house from Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com.
Only a select few get to crash with you, with the great Mike Gill, and I am part of that small fraternity of people.
Yes. I did take you in for a couple of nights in Arizona at the Super Bowl. Yes, you are right about that. Well, you know, I might be looking for someone to travel with me on this trip, so I'll let you know.
Okay. Listen, I would love to do a Phillies
you ever been to PNC Park?
Road trip. It's funny. I have, but not during a game. I just sort of was able to see it while I was in Pittsburgh with some friends I was right at the ballpark, but not there was not a game going on at the time.
I've been there quite a few times when I was in West Virginia. Oh, it's amazing. It's one of my favorite ballparks. In fact, outside of Fenway and Wrigley, who I put in their own category, it might be my favorite ballpark that I've ever been to. Now, I haven't been there since 2001, so I'm looking forward to getting back there. But all right, man, got a bunch of topics I want to hit on you for today here on the Sports Bash. Number one, Pro Football Focus is doing its kind of rankings of their individual units. So I want to start with this one. Does it matter to you that the Eagles linebacker unit is the 31st ranked unit by Pro Football Focus? And I know these rankings are arbitrary, but what I guess it means is they think that spot is going to be a problem. 31st, second worst linebacking unit in the league. Is that going to be an issue this season? If you have one of the worst linebacking units, do you agree with them, number one? And number two, is that going to be a problem?
Who is 32, by the way, before I say if I agree or not?
I will look that up for you very quickly.
Listen, I think it's clearly the weakest spot. I think it's a hard projection for PFF or for anybody because you just don't know what to expect from Nakobe.
The Rams, by the way. The Rams are 32nd.
Makes sense. I think linebacker play is one of the few positions, Mike, that it's great. You can have great individual play at linebacker, but a lot of times it's dependent on what's in front of you. For example, Clay Harbor, I think we mentioned this in a recent show podcast. He does a lot of Bears post game, and he thinks that TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds, who's a very good linebacker for the Bills, who signed with the Bears, are going to struggle because the Bears defensive tackles are not going to keep them clean. Neither of those guys are huge, enormous linebackers, so they're going to have a lot of bodies flying at them because Bears defensive tackles aren't going to do a great job, in his opinion, of holding up those blocks. And that's what you would have some concern with the Eagles. Jordan Davis, that's supposed to be his job, occupy those blocks. But if he can't play more than 15 to 20 snaps a game, and even when he comes out, who comes in? Who's playing that nose tackle on rundowns? Jalen Carter I expect to be good, but who's going to be next to him when Davis isn't on the field? So I think the success of Eagles linebackers will be determined in some part on how good the two or three guys in the interior line are doing their jobs. Mm-hmm. But also, they could be doing their jobs well, and poor linebacker play is poor linebacker play. We saw that from Eric Wilson just a couple of years ago, and then they had to bench him. So I think when you look at Nakobe Dean and Nick Morrow, you have one guy who's supposed to be very talented, but not a downhill linebacker per se, and another guy who's had some good years being a tackler in this league, but also needs to be kept clean. So I think the ranking is fair, but also I'd say that there's better upside than being 31 if Nakobe Dean winds up being a pretty good player.
I agree with that. And I guess the genesis of the thought is, if you don't have good linebackers, are we back to a situation where you were a couple of years? Like, how important are the linebackers to the success of this particular defense? I don't know how to quantify it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem you'll have is getting picked apart across the middle. And that was the issue 2 years ago when every quarterback completed 60-something% against the Eagles. It was like, one after another, 65, 68, 70%. And a lot of them were just picking the Eagles apart across the middle. Now, the Eagles have tightened up things on the outside with their corners. They've got safeties who may not be as good as last year, but maybe have some good future upside. And again, their pass rush is still going to be pretty good. So I don't see a repeat of 2 years ago, but I do think that there are going to be times when an opponent like Washington last year will say, I think we can run on these guys. And we may not, just like Washington, we may not average 4.5 per carry. In that game, Washington averaged 3.8 a carry. They didn't run the ball well. They just ran the ball at a high volume and tried their hardest to set up makeable second and third downs. And I think some opponents will look to the Eagles defense this year and try to do the same thing and force the Eagles to try to scheme around that.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, PFF ranks the Eagles secondary number 3. Are you surprised with the safety questions? I think they're really weighing heavily the corners in this situation, but they seem to like what the Eagles did at safety. Third best secondary in all of football. Are we too worried about the secondary?
Wow, that's a pretty good ranking there.
Yes,
I wonder.
I was pretty surprised.
I wonder who the people who are doing the ranking, who are they projecting to start at safety? I mean, I think, Terrell Edmonds is an obvious one, but is it Reed Blankenship? Is it Justin Evans? Is it Sidney Brown?
I'll tell you right now, their projected starters are Slay, Bradbury, Maddox, Reed Blankenship, and Terrell Edmonds.
Yeah. I think there's a to-be-determined element of that, and I think, again, those guys can be really helped out if the pass rush is good, and the Eagles have really good pass rushers. And if the scheme is solid, if the post-snap movement is confusing quarterbacks, and that's what you're looking for Sean Desai to bring to this team that maybe Jonathan Gadden didn't bring enough of, scheming pass rushers and confusing quarterbacks a little more, then I can see it. Talent for talent, it is pretty hard to have 3 better corners when healthy than Slay, Bradbury, and Avonte Maddox. The safeties, I think, are okay. I don't think they're great, but there aren't that many teams that you can say have 2 Pro Bowl level safeties. San Francisco has very good safeties. Off the top of my head, I think New England has some pretty good safeties. So, but when you put the corners and the safeties together, I certainly think the Eagles are in the top 5, top 7, top 3 might be generous, but you know what? I haven't really looked across the league to see what everybody's got.
Yeah. By the way, number 1 in the league is the Jets, right? So the Jets, not that much of a surprise, right? Because of what they have in that secondary there. The Miami Dolphins, number 2, and then Philadelphia's number 3, followed by Denver at number 4. It just feels like,
Denver's good.
It just feels that the Eagles, when you're talking about those, team, now Chuck Clark, I think, got hurt. Is he done for the year? I think, with the Jets tore his ACL. But I think, the Eagles have a Baltimore's number 5, Dallas is number 6. I just think that the Eagles have two pretty big questions in that secondary, but to be still well regarded. I don't know. Do you get worried at all, Moshe, as we're, inside of a month to training camp now, that Bradbury or Slay, that one of them has a little slippage?
Of course. I think that's a concern. You have a new defensive coordinator. You're hoping that he's an improvement, but you don't know, right? You lost a really good pass rusher in Javon Hargrave, so you're hoping that guys like Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith give you, as rookies, can help compensate. Derek Barnett comes back. Brandon Graham comes off a really good year. I mean, they still should be I imagine if PFF ranks pass rushing lines or units, the Eagles are going to be pretty high up there in top, if not number 1, top 3. So that always helps your cornerbacks. It always helps your secondary as a whole. But like we've seen over the last 2 years, even last year when they finished number 2, we've seen when they face a certain level of quarterback, the numbers seem to regress quite a bit. So, and they're going to face quite a few good quarterbacks this year. So it'll be it remains to be seen whether this secondary is as good as maybe the metrics or the websites are giving them that credit for.
Well, you asked about the defensive line, and look at me. I have that information for you, Geoff Mosher. They are ranked number 1, according to Pro Football Focus. They have the best defensive line, and something they said that I thought stood out as well. There is a case to be made that Philadelphia's second-string defensive line would also be in the top 20 on this list. But are you surprised losing Hargrave? And, you know, you have a couple of questions, I would guess, that they're number 1.
I'm only a little bit surprised because of the questions that the Eagles have on the interior. It feels like PFF is just focusing on edge here, and that's fair. You can literally have an alpha line, a Bravo line, and a C line, too, of edge rushers and be pretty good compared to what some other teams have. But, you know.
No, this is the full defensive line, by the way.
Right, but it feels like they're putting more weight on the edge than on the interior.
Gotcha.
I mean, Fletcher Cox is good, though. Fletcher Cox is going to give you a certain base level of performance. I just think it, you know, with rookies, you just don't know. So you expect Jalen Carter to be pretty good. Jordan Davis has a lot of questions to answer. I imagine he'll be better than last year and play more as long as his conditioning is good. But, you know, San Francisco, they had a good D-line last year because they had Bosa, and they just added Hargrave. They have Armstead. I'm surprised that San Francisco didn't sort of overtake them a little bit, but I don't think they're as deep as the Eagles on the defensive line.
They are number 2, by the way, San Francisco. Number 3 is in the division. It is Washington at number 3. Miami is number 4, and Pittsburgh is number 5. Dallas, by the way, came in at number 8, and the Giants came in at number 9. So it looks like a lot of good pass rushing units in this NFC East.
And I believe every team you mentioned is on the Eagles' schedule this year, even the Jets, right? You said we're high, or that
Buffalo, by the way, is 7. Miami's 4. San Francisco's on the schedule. They are 2. Washington is 3. Yes, so many of the top 10 teams in football, yes, they are on Philadelphia. And New England's number 12. They're on the list. 13 is Kansas City. They're on the list. 14 is the Jets, and they're on the list.
Yeah, and by the way, that Washington D-line, which is, I think you said 4th?
Washington, number 3.
3, and that's with Chase Young not really doing a whole lot over the first few years. If that kid actually is healthy and recognizes the potential that he had, you add that with Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, I don't think there'll be a better defense, at least not a better starting D-line. Now, I mean, the Eagles may be deeper, but that right there is a ferocious defensive front.
It is. And DeMarcus Lawrence, who, by the way, part of Dallas's defensive line, he said last week to Rob Monty that he didn't think the gap was too wide between them and Philadelphia. Moshe, I don't think he's wrong about that statement. How close is that gap at the start of the season for you as we enter training camp? A lot of people seem to be saying, hey, Philadelphia is pretty vulnerable here, yet at the same time thinking that they're the best team.
Well, I mean, I think that last year showed the gap wasn't that far. I mean, those were some pretty good games, right, between the Eagles and the Cowboys. And Dak seems to perform pretty well against the Eagles. So they added – listen, I thought a sneaky good move for them was adding Stephon Gilmore. We talked about that. I mean, Stephon doesn't have to be their number 1 because they have Trayvon Diggs. But that's a pretty good one, too, because they were getting killed – on the other side with whether it was Jordan Lewis or Anthony Brown or Kelvin Joseph. I mean, now they've got a guy who may not be what he was 5 years ago, but you're not going to beat him 6 or 7 times a game. I mean, he can still play a little bit. You added Mozzie Smith. DeMarcus Lawrence is a good player. Obviously, they have Micah Parsons, who just gets better and better. So I don't think there's a whole lot of, I know they lost the first game, what was it, 26-17, and then they won the next game 40-34. I mean, when these two teams play, it tends to be a pretty close game. And both times, right, they lost the first game, but they had Cooper Rush start for them.
Yes.
The Eagles lost the second game, but they had
Gardner Minshew
start for them. It'll be nice to see a Dak versus Jalen Hurts game for once,
Yeah, that would be. And the one thing that I think for Dallas, which may have closed the gap on things, is they finally have admitted that Pollard is their guy. I think adding Pollard as the main guy makes their offense much more explosive.
Yeah, I definitely think. Now he has to prove he can handle a higher volume workload, but I still think that they're going to add to that running back core before the season begins, just to have a number 2 or a 2A, or they could even bring Ezekiel Elliott back. It wouldn't shock me.
Yeah. All right, Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds. New podcast dropped. Get it on your podcasting platforms. Check that out with Adam and Jeff, InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast. You can check out Jeff back here on Wednesday's show. Adam will be here tomorrow. We'll continue our previews of the divisions, the AFC North. We'll take a look at with Andrew on Thursday's edition of Football at 4. We're inside a month to Eagles training camp, and Football at 4 has you right here on the Sports Bash. All right, Moshe. Looks like you're on vacation, man. What are you, relaxing over there?
No, I'm just in my living room. That's all.
I was going to say, you got your feet up, you're just hanging out. It looks like you're like pondering out the window there on what's your next move.
I'm pondering out the window. When's the next thunderstorm rolling in? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, right. This summer has not got off to a great weather start.
Oh man, I feel like we're living in the jungle, man. It's crazy.
All right, man. I'll talk to you.
See you later.